I do not care who you are. This is a delivery conversation." That was what the smug manager barked into the microphone while wagging a finger on Zoom as if he were lecturing a toddler. Evelyn Mercer sat in dead silence while every colleague on the Stratwell Solutions side of the screen clenched their jaw, and every eye on the Bolton Doyle side darted to their coffee mugs. The call had been progressing smoothly until Evelyn made the mistake of speaking. She had been explaining final task allocations on the logistics scope for a $500 million federal infrastructure bid, presenting 18 months of strategic operations work in a brief summary, when Trevor Vance, the partner manager from Bolton Doyle, cut her off mid-sentence like she was reading the wrong weather report. He had first asked who she was, letting out a fake laugh like some theatrical villain, before delivering the follow-up strike. He told her he did not care who she was and insisted that only delivery leaders should speak. The bluntness of his interruption felt like a physical blow in the virtual meeting room, silencing the ongoing debate instantly. Evelyn immediately muted her microphone. She did not do it because she lacked the words to defend herself, but because she knew that silence carried far more weight than outrage when wielded with precision. It was the kind of cold silence that allowed other people to drown in their own arrogance, without requiring any help from her department. She watched Trevor continue talking, his voice bouncing with unearned confidence. The Stratwell chief executive officer tried to smooth things over with a nervous chuckle, suggesting that everyone stay focused on the big picture, clearly hoping the uncomfortable moment would be forgotten by the weekend. Evelyn, however, did not forget. She clicked out of the shared presentation deck, opened a hidden directory on her local system, and accessed a folder labeled Bolton Doyle Compliance. Inside, she had already compiled screenshots, flagged messages, and detailed project timelines, building a quiet archive of corporate misconduct. The contract in question was the pinnacle of Evelyn's career, a massive federal project funded by the Department of Transportation that would overhaul the regional freight corridor. For Stratwell Solutions, securing a portion of this $500 million allocation meant long-term stability and the ability to hire dozens of new engineers. Evelyn had lived and breathed the procurement details for over a year, analyzing federal acquisition regulations, negotiating with material vendors, and constructing a phasing model that minimized cost overruns. She had work hours that frequently stretched past midnight, studying previous successful submissions to ensure that Stratwell's documentation was flawless. The partnership with Bolton Doyle had been proposed as a joint venture to combine Stratwell's logistical brilliance with Bolton's sheer size, a marriage of technical capability and corporate scale. Evelyn had built her professional reputation on predictability and thoroughness. In the chaotic world of federal contracting, where schedules were constantly disrupted by supply shortages and shifting political priorities, she was the stabilizing force. She did not seek visibility, nor did she participate in the self-promoting banter that filled corporate channels. Instead, she worked behind the scenes, ensuring that every budget line was justified and every compliance metric was satisfied. Her colleagues knew that if Evelyn signed off on a proposal, it was ready for the most rigorous audit. This meticulous nature was exactly why Martin Reynolds had assigned her to lead the joint venture's operational framework. He knew that Bolton Doyle had a reputation for aggressive expansion, but lacked the internal controls necessary to satisfy federal ethics inspectors. Evelyn had started compiling this file 2 months prior, because Trevor Vance had always carried himself like someone who believed internal company policies were designed solely for junior staff. Her hand hovered over the mouse, a cold calm settling over her as the meeting continued. She was supposed to serve as the primary operational bridge between Stratwell and this partnership. The persons responsible for ensuring everything ran smoothly among procurement, engineering, and the Federal Compliance Board. She had never demanded the spotlight, but she had certainly earned her place at the conference table. Yet Trevor had just tried to yank her chair out from under her in front of federal observers who might not have understood the internal politics, but certainly felt the sudden shift in respect. Evelyn knew this was not a simple, isolated incident. Trevor had a reputation for undermining operations specialists, particularly women, to secure his own position. The corporate cultures of the two firms had clashed from the first day of the collaboration. Stratwell was an engineering-first organization that valued technical accuracy and collaborative decision-making, while Bolton Doyle was a traditional consulting firm driven by sales metrics and executive hierarchy. Trevor Vance represented the worst aspects of that consulting environment. He was a manager who measured progress by the number of slide decks generated rather than the actual viability of the engineering models. He viewed the partnership as an opportunity for Bolton Doyle to absorb Stratwell's intellectual property while gradually pushing their personnel out of key leadership positions. Evelyn had observed this pattern early on, noting how Trevor routinely took credit for the work of junior engineers and dismissed the concerns of technical experts who raised questions about the project's aggressive schedule. The dismissive and territorial manner in which Trevor had spoken told her everything she needed to know. He was not just territorial, he wanted her removed from the project entirely so he could claim sole credit for the framework. She resolved to give him his wish, though it would not unfold the way he anticipated. By the time the conference call ended, and Evelyn unmuted to offer her standard closing remarks, she had already archived 3 distinct documents. The first was the original joint scope of work she had authored. The second was the revised draft featuring edit requests from Bolton Doyle. The third was a complete log of internal messages where their engineering team used her exact phrasing word for word in their technical summaries. She was not acting out of paranoia. She was simply preparing, and Trevor had no idea he had just handed her the ammunition. As her colleagues logged off the call with strained smiles, Evelyn leaned back in her office chair and reviewed her inbox. She scrolled down until she found the message from 3 years ago when she had turned down an offer to join Bolton Doyle. The subject line read, "Your decline." The message, written by Trevor Vance during his time as their hiring lead, was blunt. He had told her that she would regret saying no and added that women like her always discover they are easily replaceable. Evelyn smiled, not because the message was amusing, but because Trevor had committed the ultimate professional error of putting his hostility in writing. When she had first received it, she did not respond in anger. Instead, she forwarded the message to her personal email, sent a blind copy to her company's legal counsel, and saved it. Now she exported it as a document, labeling it Bolton Doyle Contingency. She was not planning to make emotional appeals or write online articles about workplace dynamics. She was focused on establishing an undeniable paper trail that could dissolve a $500 million partnership if the other side pushed too far, and Trevor had just walked off a cliff. The following morning, Evelyn opened her email client and noticed an immediate anomaly. The daily synchronization thread for the Stratwell and Bolton Doyle collaboration, which she had established from the ground up, was missing her name. A communication loop she had participated in every day for the last 10 months was now moving forward without her involvement. Initially, she assumed it was a system error, a permissions glitch, or a minor digital oversight that would be corrected before lunch. But by noon, she realized the omission was deliberate. The project charter was undergoing revisions, and new red lines from the Bolton Doyle team were arriving rapidly. Her name had been systematically stripped from the document headers. The operational matrix she had spent weeks designing was still there, but it had been recolored and presented as a collaborative template. Collaborative, in this context, apparently meant that they would keep her entire technical structure while discarding her name. At 1:13 in the afternoon, her chief executive officer sent her a brief message. He explained that Bolton Doyle was pushing for a simpler leadership hierarchy with fewer voices in the mix. He told her they wanted a single point of contact from Stratwell, adding that it was not personal, but simply corporate politics. Evelyn drafted a response, deleted it, drafted another, and deleted that one too. She finally sent a simple message stating that she noted the change and asked how she could best offer support. She intended to support the project by providing enough documented evidence to dismantle the entire consulting group. If they wanted her to focus on documentation, she would oblige, though not in the manner they expected. Evelyn created a private workspace on her system, nesting directories for correspondence, scope changes, and file access records. She configured her mail client to automatically tag any message containing partner keywords. Whenever they mistakenly copied her on an email, she saved it. When colleagues forwarded threads she had been excluded from, she captured screenshots showing the progression. She was not being dramatic. She was establishing context. Context is what aggressive managers forget to track, and it is the exact tool used to clarify matters when everyone else's memory suddenly becomes convenient. A week passed, and Evelyn went from leading the project strategy to serving as silent operational support. Closed-door meetings became the norm, and the chat channels she had established were archived. Patrick Higgins, the lead project manager for Bolton Doyle, stopped responding to her notes in the shared tracking system. When she pointed out a budget discrepancy between the second and third phases of the plan, Patrick replied that they would address it with leadership, ignoring the fact that she had previously been part of that group. Evelyn stopped offering corrections. Instead, she generated duplicates of the files they were modifying, creating side-by-side comparisons that highlighted sentences lifted directly from her earlier drafts. She had coined unique terms like operational cascade, realignment, and proactive schedule integration during late-night writing sessions, and now she watched the partner team present them as their own innovations. On Thursday, she sat silently through a preparation call where Bolton Doyle presented their updated schedule. It was her schedule, identical in every way, except Patrick Higgins had placed his name on the cover page. Afterward, she received an email from her chief operating officer, thanking her for letting the partner company take the lead and stating that the arrangement was cleaner. Evelyn opened her voice recorder and documented the details, noting the date and time, the specific slides presented, and the versions they matched. She also reviewed the server access history and discovered that Patrick had accessed Stratwell's restricted repository at 2:14 in the morning on a Saturday. This was the specific folder where her proprietary scope drafts were stored, a directory that was supposed to be sandboxed and inaccessible to external partners. She quietly recorded the access log and saved an encrypted copy. At the end of the week, representatives from Human Resources asked how she was adjusting to the changes. They spoke to her with gentle concern, as if she were struggling rather than observing. Evelyn assured them she was doing well, because this situation was not about her comfort. It was about establishing absolute control. Since they did not want her voice in the meetings, she became the quiet recorder of their actions, documenting every instance of plagiarism and unauthorized file retrieval. She was no longer in the room, but she had a clear view of their actions, and the data she was gathering was becoming increasingly significant. It was during the second preparation meeting with the federal contract liaison that Evelyn observed the most glaring violation. Patrick Higgins was presenting the proposal architecture, explaining how their framework allowed for parallelized task clusters across phased contractor groups. As Evelyn began analyzing her options, after the meeting, she focused on the legal protections available under federal law. The technical proposal she had drafted contained proprietary algorithms and logistical models that were the exclusive intellectual property of Stratwell Solutions. Under Title 17 United States Code Section 106, Stratwell held the exclusive rights to reproduce and distribute derivative works based on this material. Furthermore, the specialized scheduling framework she developed qualified as a trade secret under the Defend Trade Secrets Act, codified at Title 18 United States Code Section 1836. By downloading version 10.3 from the restricted repository without authorization, Patrick Higgins had not just committed a breach of professional etiquette, he had engaged in the unauthorized appropriation of proprietary business information. Evelyn knew that these statutory protections provided far more leverage than any human resources policy. Evelyn did not react. She simply tilted her head, listening to him use her exact terminology. Parallelized task clusters was a phrase she had created during a long night of writing to describe how subcontractor timelines could overlap without consuming the same resources. She had used it in a footnote and a timeline summary on page 12 of version 10.3, a document marked for internal Stratwell distribution only. She watched Patrick present the concept as if he had discovered a new law of physics to an audience that had never seen a light bulb. Her expression remained neutral, but her resolve hardened. As soon as the call concluded, she reviewed the audit logs for version 10.3. The server history confirmed the document had been accessed remotely at 2:14 in the morning by an integration account assigned to Patrick Higgins. The account was supposed to be restricted to public timelines, yet Patrick had spent 47 minutes downloading files. He had downloaded 3 distinct files and copied 2 of them to an external device, leaving clear digital fingerprints. Evelyn captured screenshots of every step in the log. She then used a file integrity application to extract the metadata from the proposal drafts, confirming the document title and showing that it had been last modified and saved under Patrick's user profile. She stared at the screen for 5 seconds and let out a soft laugh. He had not even bothered to mask his identity. Evelyn compiled the evidence into an encrypted archive and uploaded it to her personal storage. She then drafted a concise email to Margaret Boyd, the company's senior legal counsel, outlining the unauthorized file access, the sandbox breach, and the verbatim use of proprietary strategy language in the partners' slides. She attached the logs and screenshots, sending it without additional distribution. She knew the legal department would understand the severity of the report. This was not a minor case of professional copying. It was the theft of proprietary business methods, and Patrick had documented his own actions. Evelyn thought about Patrick's confident presentation, the way he had accepted praise for collaborative innovation as if he had created it himself. She knew now that this was a coordinated effort to push her out and replace her with her own stolen work. The entire Bolton Doyle team had been rewriting the proposal, using her materials, cutting her out while claiming the strategy. Evelyn opened her private tracking folder and added new logs. Confirmed unauthorized access via Sandbox account on March 10th, metadata verification of file, download by Patrick Higgins on March 11th, and formal notification sent to legal counsel. She locked the file and saved it. That night, she slept soundly, driven by calculation rather than concern. She knew that using proprietary language in a joint federal proposal could lead to severe intellectual property disputes and eventual disqualification. She had remained professional, allowing the partner team to operate outside their boundaries, but now they were using her work and erasing her name. Evelyn was no longer asking questions. She was finalizing the defense mechanism. The email from Trevor Vance had been sitting in her archive for 3 years, a quiet liability waiting to be activated. When she searched his name in her mail client, the message appeared immediately. Sent on a Tuesday morning after she had rejected their offer, the email was a clear display of professional hostility and gender-based dismissal. Trevor had written that she would regret her decision and that women like her were easily replaced. Evelyn read the words again, noting how their meaning had shifted. At the time, the message was merely unprofessional. Now, it was a critical piece of legal leverage. Bolton Doyle had signed a mutual partnership agreement that included a strict non-disparagement clause. Under Clause 9.1c, any documented history of discrimination or retaliatory behavior by project leaders was grounds for an ethics review and potential termination of the partnership. Evelyn copied the text into her contingency folder. She recorded a brief voice memo detailing the date of the email, the identity of the sender, and its relevance to the current federal bid. She remained entirely calm, letting the partner team proceed with their presentation while she waited for the legal framework to align. The following day, during a routine compliance meeting, she casually asked a question about the contract terms. She asked for confirmation that the partnership agreement held both companies accountable for past conduct that could impact project integrity. The chief executive officer hesitated, but Margaret Boyd from the legal team answered immediately, confirming that Clause 9.1c required the disclosure of any prior discriminatory or retaliatory behavior by current project leaders. Evelyn smiled and thanked her, keeping her evidence hidden. Later that evening, when the legal department requested a review of project correspondence, Evelyn provided the archive containing the 3-year-old email from Trevor Vance. She did not include any personal comments. She let the written record speak for itself. She knew that the moment Trevor had dismissed her during the conference call, he had activated his own downfall. He had assumed she was replaceable, but he had simply failed to read the contract terms. The silence in the office during the days leading up to the bid submission was suffocating. Evelyn watched the public channels, noting how the messaging shifted from collaborative problem-solving to formal announcements. She could see that the Stratwell executives were uncomfortable with how she was being treated, yet they were paralyzed by the fear of losing the deal. Martin Reynolds avoided eye contact during their brief encounters in the hallway, his face carrying the strain of a leader who had compromised his values for financial security. Evelyn did not press him, nor did she complain to her colleagues. She knew that any emotional display would only make it easier for them to dismiss her as difficult or uncooperative. Instead, she maintained her professional demeanor, delivering her documentation summaries on time while ensuring that every digital interaction was logged and archived. The initial response from the legal department was quiet. A brief email arrived from internal counsel asking for a review of the recent scope adjustments. Evelyn reviewed the message and realized the investigation was beginning. Legal was auditing every modification made to the proposal since she had been reassigned, checking every edit, budget change, and timeline shift introduced by Bolton Doyle. Evelyn provided them with 3 specific items: the track changes showing the edits against her original version, a detailed timeline comparison, and the server access log showing the unauthorized downloads. The documents presented a clear, undeniable sequence of events. She sent the files with a simple note, stating she hoped they would clarify the origin of the edits. She received no immediate reply, which was typical of how the legal team handled sensitive compliance matters. 2 days later, she observed a change in the behavior of the Bolton Doyle team. The confidence they had shown in meetings seemed to waver. Patrick Higgins began explaining his edits in excessive detail, and Laura Finch, their director, stopped making casual jokes. Trevor Vance was no longer active in the meetings. His camera remained off, and his name was absent from the attendee lists. A quiet tension had settled over their team. During a subsequent preparation call, Laura Finch walked the group through the new organizational structure, presenting the roles that Evelyn had originally defined. When they reached slide 14, Laura let out a short laugh and commented that they needed to make the proposal less estrogen-heavy to prevent the federal reviewers from viewing it as a diversity initiative rather than a serious delivery contract. The comment was followed by a long, quiet pause. Evelyn did not react. She simply noted the comment, the slide number, and the exact timestamp. She did not need to file a formal complaint herself. Within minutes of the call's conclusion, a human resources representative contacted her, asking if she had been present when the director made the remark. Evelyn confirmed she was on the call and provided the recorded audio log, presenting the facts without personal commentary. The incident was documented immediately. The proposal's compliance section, which required strict adherence to federal non-discrimination guidelines, was placed under review. Under Clause 4.3e, any partner firm engaging in discriminatory language could be disqualified from the joint submission. Evelyn reviewed the contract terms that evening, recognizing that the situation was moving toward a clear resolution. She did not celebrate. She simply watched the documentation compile. The next morning, Martin Reynolds called her for a private discussion. The chief executive officer looked exhausted. He admitted that the current arrangement was not ideal and thanked her for handling the changes with professionalism. Evelyn expressed her appreciation for his comments. Martin then admitted that the legal team was investigating the partnership history and asked if any undisclosed issues remained. Evelyn looked directly at the camera and stated that the legal department had all the necessary documentation. Martin nodded slowly, appearing both relieved and concerned. Evelyn realized he was beginning to understand the situation. The quiet specialist they had sidelined was the only person who had tracked every modification, archived every message, and understood the compliance risks. She did not want an apology, she wanted a resolution. 3 days before the final presentation to the Federal Review Board, Martin Reynolds called an unscheduled alignment meeting. The invitation contained a simple subject line regarding presentation roles. Evelyn knew what was coming. The call began with standard corporate small talk, and Patrick Higgins displayed his usual confidence. Martin then cleared his throat and announced an adjustment to the presentation order. He explained that they had agreed to let the Bolton Doyle director open the pitch, suggesting it would provide a cleaner narrative flow. Evelyn remained silent. She had spent 8 months preparing to present this proposal, designing the operational structure and delivery metrics. Now, she was being removed from the presentation entirely. She nodded and asked if they had reviewed the compliance attachments, specifically the final organizational chart. The room became quiet. Martin asked what she meant. Evelyn shared her screen, displaying the final organizational chart that had been submitted to the federal reviewers. She pointed out that the document contained 48 names, including 5 from Stratwell, but her name was entirely absent from the list. There was no mention of her role as strategy lead. Laura Finch attempted to dismiss the omission as a formatting error, but Evelyn scrolled through the text to show there was no record of her involvement. She explained that Section 6.2.2 of the federal guidelines required absolute consistency between the proposed team structure and the actual project staff, and any undocumented changes could lead to disqualification. The participants remained silent. Martin suggested they meet the next day to address the corrections. Evelyn stopped sharing her screen and remained on the call until everyone else had disconnected. She checked the compliance portal and saw that the submission status had been updated to pending review due to organizational irregularities. She sat at her desk, watching the status indicator, knowing the contract terms would address the issue. On Monday morning, Margaret Boyd entered Evelyn's office. The senior counsel did not offer the usual pleasantries. She simply placed a folder on the desk. She explained that they had reviewed the original partnership agreement and confirmed that Clause 9.1 prohibited any changes to the project team without formal consent from both parties. She noted that Evelyn had been officially listed as the strategy lead in the initial drafts. Margaret then showed her a printed copy of an email from Trevor Vance to Patrick Higgins, where Trevor had written that they should remove her from the project, referring to her as an operations specialist who could easily be replaced. Evelyn read the message, noting that the document confirmed the breach of contract. Trevor had documented his decision to remove her without approval while using dismissive language. The legal counsel confirmed that the current submission was in violation of the agreement unless the original structure was restored, but noted that the tone of the email made a simple correction unlikely. Evelyn asked if Stratwell had ever approved the changes, and Margaret confirmed they had not. Evelyn then pointed out that the partner firm had failed to notify the federal board of the adjustments. She noted that they were now facing a breach of contract, a compliance violation, and documented hostility from the project lead. Margaret agreed, noting that the email from Trevor was a serious liability. Evelyn closed the folder and suggested it was time to address the matter with leadership. Margaret had already scheduled a meeting with the chief executive officer for 3 in the afternoon, and Evelyn was asked to attend. When they entered the conference room, Martin Reynolds was waiting with the company's legal advisors. The atmosphere was quiet and tense. Margaret presented the evidence step by step, showing the contract terms, the organizational chart, and the email exchange. Martin looked at the documents, recognizing that the entire proposal was compromised. He asked Evelyn if she was prepared to proceed with this course of action, and she replied that the partner firm had created the situation by removing her from the project. Martin attempted to apologize, but Evelyn stood, gathered her materials, and stated that she would provide her recommendation the following day. She walked out of the room, leaving the executives to address the evidence. The final meeting was held in a standard hotel conference room. The Stratwell legal team had requested the discussion to address compliance issues, and no representatives from Bolton Doyle were present. Evelyn sat next to Margaret Boyd and their contracts specialist, while Martin Reynolds sat at the head of the table. Evelyn placed her phone on the table, displaying the email thread where Trevor Vance had discussed removing her from the project. Margaret reviewed the text, and the contract specialist agreed that the message violated the ethical standards required for federal bids. He explained that the unauthorized changes in the hostile language violated both Clause 9.1 and Section 6.2.2. Martin remained silent, looking at the documents. Evelyn then recommended that Stratwell withdraw from the joint proposal immediately. The executives looked at her in silence. Evelyn explained that the federal board would likely discover the discrepancies during the presentation, leading to a disqualification and damage to Stratwell's reputation. She noted that withdrawing now was the only way to protect the company's standing. Margaret agreed, suggesting they draft the withdrawal notice immediately. Martin finally spoke, asking if the partner firm would be able to proceed without their involvement. Evelyn stated that they would not, because they lacked the technical framework and the logistical data to support the presentation. She explained that the entire strategy had been designed by Stratwell, and the documents the partners had downloaded did not contain the detailed implementation plans. She knew that without their participation, the proposal would fail. The legal team began drafting the withdrawal notice, citing compliance and ethical issues as the basis for the decision. As Evelyn left the conference room, she knew the process was complete. The presentation was scheduled for the next day, and the partner firm remained unaware that the agreement had been dissolved. On the morning of the presentation, the participants gathered in a large boardroom at the federal office. Evelyn sat at the end of the table, her notebook closed, watching the partner team prepare. Lisa Finch began the presentation using the slides that Patrick Higgins had copied. She described the framework using the terms Evelyn had written, confident that the proposal would be accepted. She highlighted the organizational structure, pointing out the efficiency of the design. Evelyn watched them present her work, remaining entirely quiet. She looked at Martin Reynolds, who nodded and stood up. He announced that Stratwell Solutions was withdrawing from the joint proposal, effective immediately, citing compliance issues and ethical breaches by their partner. The announcement was followed by absolute silence. The federal reviewers looked at the presenters, and Lisa's expression turned to shock. The partner firm's legal representative asked for a recess, but the review board coordinator stated that the withdrawal ended the current submission. Evelyn stood, gathered her notebook, and walked out of the room. She knew that the partner firm would face a formal audit and would be unable to proceed with the bid. Her phone buzzed with a message from Margaret, confirming that the compliance check had been completed and the deal was officially over. Evelyn walked to the elevator, recognizing that her documentation and patience had resolved the matter without a single argument.